Taking you now to the U.S., and the man accused of killing UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson made his first court appearance today at a U.S. federal court. Luigi Mangione was arrested in Pennsylvania last week, and he was transferred into federal custody today and taken to New York for a court appearance. Mangione is facing 4 federal charges, including murder, in connection with the fatal shooting of Thompson in Manhattan earlier this month. Now, this case continues to grip people all over the world, and for his take on all of it, we've reached Matthew Gulluzzo. Matthew's a former Manhattan prosecutor and a current criminal defense lawyer, joining us tonight from Darien, Connecticut. Thanks for being on the program, Matthew.
Thank you for having me.
So initially, Mangione fought extradition, but he dropped that fight today, agreeing to go to New York. What do you think is behind that?
Well, most people who are going to be extradited from one state to the other don't contest the extradition because it's kind of a fait accompli. It's almost impossible to defeat the transfer. So I think he probably just wanted to get this show on the road and go ahead and get over to New York.
Well, and once he did get over to New York, he was also charged with federal offenses as well, as we were just reporting. What does that mean for him?
Right. It's somewhat unusual, but not impossible for someone to face parallel prosecutions in both state court and federal court for the same offense or behavior or crime. And that's what's happening here with him. The main import, I think, of him facing a federal charge in this case is that unlike at the New York state level, where he had been previously indicted, in the federal system, he is potentially subject to capital punishment for this offense. So there is the specter of the death penalty hanging over the federal case.
And how do you think that might alter the case here?
Well, I mean, hopefully he does not receive the death penalty, but I suppose that is possible as an end result for this case. I think it does probably slow down the entire process quite a bit, because normally when you are charged in federal court with a capital punishment eligible offense, the first thing you have to do is have a very long conversation with the federal prosecutors and the attorney general in Washington, D.C. about whether or not the prosecutors are going to actually ask for that punishment or not. And that's usually could be a year-long process of presenting mitigating evidence about the person's background and about the offense to convince them not to pursue that punishment. So both these cases may sort of be on pause while that conversation between the defense and the attorney general in Washington, D.C.
Okay, and you called the combo here of state and federal charges unusual. Mangione's New York attorney is calling the combo highly unusual, saying that she's even seeking clarity on it. What does that approach from his New York attorney kind of signal about where his defense team's legal strategy is headed?
Right, it's definitely unusual to have both prosecutors in Manhattan pursuing charges against somebody for the same conduct. Usually one or the other will take the case and the other one will let the other one do it. So to have them both going, it increases the possibility he's going to get an enormous sentence. He could get consecutive sentences from both court systems and then be effectively serving a very, very long imprisonment term. The question kind of becomes, is it double jeopardy? Now, normally you can't be prosecuted twice for the same offense, but this isn't necessarily double jeopardy here, because although the act that we're talking about is the same in both courts, and only one person was killed, it's technically 2 different crimes because they have different elements. In federal court, we're talking about a firearm being used in the course of murder, and then in state court, we're talking about murder as an act of terrorism. So they are slightly different crimes, even though we're talking about really the same thing. And so they're probably going to put forth a double jeopardy argument. It's probably not going to work. And, they're going to complain anyway that it's unfair that he's being prosecuted, in a sort of twice for the same offense.
Well, and we know through his lawyers that he is expected to plead not guilty, but there has been so much evidence already laid out before the public. And I'm curious, when there's that much evidence before the public already, before something like this already hits trial, how does that impact the way in which a defense lawyer tries to defend a client?
Well, absolutely. It's not normally something the defense likes to have happen, where all this evidence is already out there in the public domain, because the potential jurors, are forming opinions about the case before they've even heard the evidence. And, usually we expect that to be, to the detriment of the defendant. So I think The defense is probably not happy about all of this coverage in that sense, because some of the stuff that's getting out there may not be admissible at the actual criminal trial. But when you have all this going on, this does present an interesting problem: is can you get a fair trial in the city? Can you find jurors that will be objective about what's going on? It seems like there's a lot of media coverage, and it's all over social media, and everybody appears to be fascinated with this case and has already formed opinions about it. So, but in a weird way, here there are some people who may actually be very sympathetic to Mr. Mangione's situation, and that possibly could help him out. I think the evidence is so overwhelming that he in fact committed this crime that this sympathy that's out there for him, or at least his mission apparently, might help them with just mitigating his sentence, or perhaps helping him avoid the death penalty.
Well, and when they're trying to select the jury, I would imagine lawyers from both sides will be asking questions, obviously, about health care, for one thing, as well. How do you think they're going to go about even building that jury team? As you kind of rightly point out, everybody in the world knows this case by this point.
Well, that's right. It's the same thing that we had with with President Trump's trial out here in New York. Is how do you find people who haven't heard something about this person or about this case? I mean, you think you're going to only find people who've been living under a rock. Those are the people that you need to be on your jury, because they're the only ones who have informed opinions. I think it's very challenging in today's media environment to find an impartial jury. But honestly, I don't think this is going to be a trial on the merits, or at least about whether or not he killed Mr. Thompson. The evidence that's coming out is so overwhelming that, to me, this case is either going to be about his mental state in some way, maybe it's going to be some sort of mental health related defense, or it's going to be a plea with, in an attempt to avoid the death penalty or a life sentence. It remains to be seen. It's going to take a lot of psychiatrists to evaluate him before I can say whether or not that's a real viable defense at trial or not. But I think that's probably where this is going, unless Mr. Mangione really wants this trial to be an opportunity for him to be heard. I think if it goes to trial, it's probably going to be over the objections of the lawyers, and probably only because he insists that he be the center of attention or have his 15 minutes to explain himself to everybody.
Well, and given the outburst we've already seen from Luigi Mangione, you're probably quite right on that point as well. But Matthew, let's leave it here for today. Thank you so much for joining us on the program tonight.
Thank you.
Matthew Gulluzzo is a former Manhattan prosecutor, and as well, he is a current criminal defense lawyer, joining us tonight from Darien, Connecticut.